time travel is weird because it's not a thing. At least it's not a thing in this timeline that I'm in right now, as far as I know. So when Chrono Trigger's like, yo, time travel, I'm like, I don't know, what if you make it really weird and I don't like it? So when I finished it, I had to say I was a little disappointed that I missed out on New Game Plus being so awesome a decade ago. But I also wouldn't have understood back then had I played it what makes it so special. But I do now. So let's break it down.
Chrono Trigger tells the story of an Earth vastly different from our own. After a malfunction with a friend's teleporter, Chrono finds himself jumping through time to stave off the apocalypse. The combat system plays out in real time, forcing you to think and act quickly. This is not so easy a task, as each character has a unique array of physical and magical tech to learn. Characters can even combine their techs into more powerful abilities during battle using dual or triple techs. Chrono Trigger has an innovative combat system, a compelling story, and a creative approach to telling said story. But is it rated S?
Chrono Trigger is such a heavily plot-driven game by no happenstance. Arguably the entire experience is attached to how the story progresses. So when Chrono Trigger picks and chooses what rules of time travel to follow and which ones to defenestrate, I can't really blame it too much. If the game followed all the rules, or the rules that I think of anyway, it'd probably be pretty boring.
The game begins with protagonist Chrono and his recent acquaintance Marle enjoying their time at the Millennial Fair in the Kingdom of Guardia. When Marle attempts to use Chrono's friend Luca's fancy new teleporter, her pendant reacts strangely and she's sent backwards in time. Of course, because he's a super heroic guy, as you can tell by his hair's shade of I'm important red, Chrono goes in after her. Now stuck in 600 AD, 400 years in the past, the changes in the world become immediately recognizable. There's a haze over the land, which itself features new locations, and while I assume it isn't being magically blasted over the entire continent, the music has changed as well. Get used to this feeling because you're introduced to an older or newer version of this world a few times throughout the game. 600 AD is referred to as the Middle Ages, also known as a time of war and knighthood and dying at the age of 30. Somehow the nation of Guardia lost their queen, but when Marle shows up, and she looks just like the queen, they're like, yeah, sure, she'll do, and they'll just keep her and give up searching for the real one. The moment that decision is all collectively agreed upon, though, Marle, who happens to be a descendant of the missing queen, disappears right in front of your face. Oops, now you're out 2 queens.
Now I get why they did it. I'm just saying if Marle never existed, or ceased to exist at some point, Chrono would never have had to go back in time. Thus, it'd just be a big frickin' paradox loop that unravel itself. It doesn't make any sense. Which is, I mean, it'd be called Chrono Trigger, the nobody does anything story. Now, I bring that up not to disparage it for being ridiculous, but actually to commend it for doing whatever it needs to do in service of the game's pacing. Or in service of the game even existing at all.
Here in the Middle Ages you meet Frog, the heroic swordsman with the grossly unimaginative name. You'll note, at least in the PS1 version, he talks like a Shakespearean nightmare and is all kinds of knightly, as is fitting for the time. Although, nobody else from this era talks like that. But when you know it, it was Frog's job to protect the queen, and now it's up to the 3 of you to go get her back. Bam! You've gone from rescuing Marle to accompanying Frog to rescue the queen, which also just happens to rescue Marle. It's for things like that Chrono Trigger is a pretty sneaky game. It drops you into a new era, immediately gives you a task, and then introduces a new character who is inextricably linked to that task. This way, as you complete each era's individual little story, you attribute said journey to the character you took it with, each of whom will eventually join your team. This develops your attachment to the characters, which in turn motivates you to use them all in combat even after you have full control of your party composition. If you've ever heard criticism of its spiritual successor / sequel Chrono Cross for having too many characters in it, this is exactly why.
Developing an attachment to the characters in an RPG. Kind of a big deal? For most people anyway. If you're not into the characters, I mean, not just not liking them, but like really just I don't care about these people, or you don't understand them, you might not be into the game at all. Now that being said, sometimes if you don't know where the overall plot is going, you may not care even more.
Even with this bit of clandestine coercion, I spent the first third or so of Chrono Trigger feeling a little confused. Not because the story was confusing, or because I was lost, in fact this game does an amazing job of keeping you on track, but because I didn't get it. I didn't understand what made this game stand out. The characters were neat, combat, neat, story, for each time period, was neat, but where was it going? Every place had its own story, but none of it seemed to contribute to any kind of grand scheme of things. Was there even a grand scheme or grand things? I had no idea.
Remember that thing I said, where Chrono Trigger follows some rules and ignores other rules? Well, my confusion with the story and the game's plot-telling genius are thus linked. To explain...
First, in 1000 AD, Guardia is at peace and everyone's super happy. When you're sent back to 600 AD, you realize Guardia is fighting the army of someone named Magus. However, since everyone's at peace 400 years later, it's natural to assume that he's probably been defeated. In fact, you know this because you return to 1000 AD to find everything still the same. Only you're arrested for allegedly kidnapping the princess. Whoops. Even if you're proven innocent in court, which is entirely based on your actions at the beginning of the game, which is pretty dang cool, you're still going to have to make a daring escape, one way or another. Time didn't move while you were gone, so you return to the exact same time at which you left. Right around, where's the freaking princess o'clock?
So when you arrive back in the present, the things that happened before you left have still already happened. Thus, the story doesn't really move on without you, only with you, which is awesome, but at the time, it was completely freaking bonkers.
After escaping, you end up in 2300 AD. The whole, wow, this place is really different feeling is pretty dang strong here. The land is desolate. The cities appear incredibly futuristic, but at the same time, a little on the, destroyed side? It's unsettling, but intriguing, like a zombie with a nice hat. Just as you did when you arrived in the Middle Ages, you have to figure out where you are. This time, your adventure is with Robo, a perky robot with a rocket punch. Akira Toriyama has a thing for rocket punches, I guess. This era's task, find food for the starving civilians. Turns out, you can't get the food without Robo, bam, formula, it is working, but this time, there was a clue. That little moment is evidence of Chrono Trigger's genius. Each of your adventures in 1000 AD, 600 AD, and 2300 AD have for the most part seemed unrelated? Not important? A missing queen, a prison escape, recovering food for people who are probably gonna die anyway. None of those things are really relevant to each other, or to stopping the end of the world, but the evidence of the grander plot, and indeed the grander concept of time as it is used in this game, is everywhere. In many an inn or residence, you'll see or hear references to things which occur in other time periods. These little encounters build up the world and give clues about what you might need to accomplish in the future, or indeed reference things that you've already accomplished. They may not have seemed that way at the time, but they shouldn't have. There wasn't much evidence that this game's plot was going anywhere until you find the Day of Lavos record. From then on, every plot point takes on new meaning, and the brilliance becomes clear.
Chrono Trigger's plot is like one of those giant robots that's made up of smaller robots. You look at the smaller robots and you're like, that's nifty, it's pretty cool. I have a poster of that maybe. But the giant robot with all of the robots built together, you're like, what? This freaking robot is awesome. It's exactly what the plot is like. You look at 1000 AD, let's call that the present, the torso, and then at 600 AD and 2300 AD are like the arms, and then there's two more time periods I didn't go into, they're like the legs, and you got yourself a giant robot with no head, except the game does have a head.
After your adventure in 2300 AD, instead of being transported to another era, you land here, at the End of Time. The End of Time is the head of this crazy giant plot robot as it acts as a control room for the player moving forward. Thanks to strange quirks involved with time travel, you're only supposed to enter gates with 3 people, so everyone who's not in your party stays here at the End of Time, with this old man, who I assume is decent company. It is from here that you can access the Pillars of Light, each of which is tied to separate gates in each timeline. In this fashion, the End of Time links each individual adventure in each timeline to the overall plot. All you have right now is knowledge of the future and a big, gigantic question mark regarding the past. So just to egg you on, you'll note one of the Pillars of Light says it goes to 65 million BC. That's a really long time ago. And sure, there's nothing to do there at the moment, but the question has been raised, the mystery discovered. Did Lavos come from this time period? How is it related to all the future timelines? Can something be done to prevent it? If you're ever gonna want to find out, you should by now. But just in case you needed a little something more to convince you, after you first leave End of Time, you'll end up on the Eastern Continent in 1000 AD. This continent is where the Fiend Lord's Keep once stood back in the Middle Ages. The Fiend Lord being Magus, the guy you were fighting in the Middle Ages. Oh, and all the monsters think that he summoned Lavos. Splatow.
Chrono Trigger's command of storytelling is paramount, beyond just the actual story itself. Time travel isn't just an absurd backdrop for the game's plot to develop along, it is integrally woven into every experience that the game has to offer. Every little innocuous activity that you and your party gets up to ends up being relevant. You eventually stop bouncing from random points of the plot to being able to explore every area freely. You get to piece all these things together. Now, I will say that the real moment where I saw that this game is rated S didn't happen until you reach 12,000 BC, but I can't spoil any of that entire experience for you guys. You're gonna have to just experience it for yourself. Thanks for watching.
Hello everyone, thank you for watching the video. I hope that you enjoyed it, because I certainly enjoyed making it. And if you really did like it, go ahead and hit the like button. If you want to share some thoughts on the video or the game, feel free to comment below, and subscribe if you want to see more. But what you should want to hear more of is Chrono Trigger music, like this cover of Corridors of Time by Boobs and Walls. Check it out.
Sits high upon